Good morning, everyone. Jim Laird joining you live from Diriamo, Nicaragua. I hope you're doing well today. I messed up the live stream on Instagram. Oh, well. Hope you guys are doing well today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Fitness for life, staying strong at any age. And very luckily, I've had dozens of clients, if not more, that and very luckily, sorry about that. There we go. Luckily, I've had dozens of clients, if more than that I trained for a 20-year period. So I'm very familiar with training people from, the age of 8 all the way through college, from in their 40s into their 60s into their 70s. Started with people in their 70s into their 90s. So I've done this for decades, and I'm going to go over some of the mistakes people make when it comes to fitness. I think the number one mistake people make is they think they can make up for no activity at all with a ton of intensity. So they basically sit on their butt all week, and then they'll go to the gym and do a 45-minute HIIT class, which isn't really truly HIIT. It's moderate intensity. It's not really true high intensity. So the first thing we want to do when we work with somebody is, one, we want to see what their aerobic base is. Because if you don't have a good aerobic base or general physical preparedness, GPP, you're not going to adapt to training. So the first 8 weeks of training is going to be a lot of movement. We're going to do a lot of circuits. We're going to see how you move. We want to make sure you move well and efficiently. We've got two types of body types. We've got the long tubular types, which is like a Dr. Stillman. And then you've got the more of a fire hydrant, blocky type, which is me, essentially. And each body type is better at certain things. Dr. Stillman is going to be much better at rotating than I am. And I'm going to be much better at picking things up off the floor, creating power in a straight line, generating force. The Dr. Stillman body types are going to be better at top end speed. And these are at the extremes, of course. There's going to be subtle nuances in between. But one of the big mistakes people make is they basically just pick a generic exercise program. And most of the exercises in the strength and conditioning world are either, one, to get you really strong, and two, to get you really jacked. And hypertrophy training and strength training is fine. You just have to understand there's trade-offs that come with those things. Just like if you make modifications to a car, like if you take like a Corolla or a Camry and you try and turn it into a drag car, you're going to give up steering, you're going to give up comfort, you're going to give up certain things. So the idea is build a general base of aerobic fitness. We can do that through general circuits. We can do that through walking. It used to be done through daily activity. People used to garden, they used to mow their grass, they used to do manual labor, they used to build their homes, people used to have physical jobs back in the 50s and 60s, even the 70s. People did a lot more work outside. They worked with their hands. Kids played outside. So now when people come to me in a strength and conditioning program, most of them haven't been very active. And if they have been, they've basically been too active, and they haven't been able to find a good balance between intensity and adaptation. And so we've got to start from the ground up, and we've got to start with general fitness. And then we basically go from general fitness into a broad strength and conditioning program. And then we want to pick exercises that basically cater to the body type that the person is in, and making sure they can get into a position that maintains their movement options or increases their movement options, and not take them away. So there's a real brief general outline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good morning, Dr. Stillman. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm great. How is everyone? Let us know in the comments.
Did you have a good weekend?
Had a great weekend, Jim. How about you? I hear you you fought off some kind of evil humor.
Yeah, I'm back from the dead. It was a very interesting weekend. I don't get sick. This is the first time I've been sick since I moved here in December. And as you know, when I get sick, I do it really well. And so
you're coming up on your 1-year Nicaragua anniversary, Jim.
I am, and we had the Spanish Independence Day here this weekend, and it was interesting. Lots of drums, lots of parades. Very, very, very fun. So it was a lot of fun. These people know how to party down here, no doubt.
They sure do. Hello, Deborah. Good to see you.
So I just basically capped it off with, in the past, people did manual labor. They had a good general base of fitness. Their body would adapt well to things.
Right.
Because we're sedentary now. The one thing we want to do is make sure people have a good aerobic base when they start, and then we want to make sure people move well, and then we want to get into a specific strength training program that is going to suit their needs, their goals, and their body type. And I think most of the information out there is based on bodybuilding and powerlifting, which don't necessarily make you a good mover over time. They take away movement options. And a lot of people will basically use compensatory strategies, which I would call, like, for example, for me, a compensatory strategy would be pressing over my head and arching really hard. You'll see the strongmen do that when they have to go overhead. And that's totally fine in competition, but we don't want to be driving that compensatory strategy because it has a price. On the yoga side of things, on the extreme mobility side of things, you'll see people do the splits. And that's not because their hamstrings and hips are uber flexible. When people do extreme moves like the splits, they're rotating through their spine to get their pelvis to get into a position where they can get into that position. So that's why you see a lot of people that there's two extremes of people that end up having surgeries and joint replacements. There's the ultra bendy people end up having hip replacements, back things, and then the power lifters on the other side of the spectrum. So as somebody who just wants to look good and feel good over the long haul, we want to be somewhere in the middle. We don't want to be on the extreme of either side.
Absolutely. Good morning, Shelly. Good to see you here. So I think the biggest thing that I encounter when taking on new patients in our modern world is exactly what you've been alluding to, which is that they're often laboring under these ideas of they know they need to be physically fit. They know exercise needs to be a part of their life, but they lack this perspective on the fact that historically life was a lot more vigorous. And this leads to what I view as a vicious cycle of I got out of shape, so I went to the gym and I did what I used to be able to do or thought I could do and got injured and then left the gym and then got even more out of shape and went back to the gym and exercised in a way that injured myself and was unsustainable and left the gym and got even more out. And this is a terrible, you see how this downward spiral, right?
Yeah.
It's like an engine shooting out. It's like, imagine a four prop engine plane.
Yeah.
Imagine losing one at a time, right? Pretty soon you got a 65-year-old patient. And they're like, well, I can't do that because my knee hurts, and I can't do this because my shoulder hurts, and I can't do this because my wrist hurts, and I got a bad hip on the other side, and so I don't move a lot. And we sympathize. And one of the things that's really fun about working with Jim is he can take just about anyone in any stage of life, no matter what their physical limitations. We've had some pretty unusual anatomical limitations in the practice, and he will still find a way to work with them in a way that is sustainable for them. But the biggest misconception is almost always this, well, basically it's like if I had to use a car analogy, it would be I'm either driving 75 miles an hour down the freeway or I'm parked in the driveway at home. And the truth is, even with cars, fastest way to burn out an engine is run it too hot for too long, too fast for too long. You want to really have an engine run for a long, long, long time. Drive 45 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. You might wear out your stop and go traffic, but that really doesn't put any wear on the engine, right, Jim?
Well, that and have an engine that's in tune and have an engine that has capacity to drive the car. So most people today are running around with a 1-cylinder or a 2-cylinder engine and they're driving an SUV. That's why aerobic conditioning is so important, having a base level of preparedness, because if you don't have a good resting heart rate, a good aerobic engine, a good respiratory rate, your body is having to work harder to produce energy. And you're having to dip into the glycolytic pathway much earlier and much sooner, and that's very, very expensive. And a
Well,
lot of people. Mhm,
let's talk about what the name of the game of this, I think, really is. And
mhm.
I think you'll agree, but I do want your input, which is
Sure.
that people misperceive the purpose of exercise.
Mhm.
So, number one, I would say one of the purposes of exercise is so you don't freeze up and become immobile, because when you lose mobility, when you lose movement options, it never ends well. That's the
Mhm.
little old person who can't get out of the way of the car. That's the little old person who can't turn over their shoulder to see the traffic in their blind spot, and then they get wrecked by an 18-wheeler. That's the little old person who falls and can't get up. You don't want to be that person. And the way you don't
Well,
become that person is you don't become that person. You don't lose those movement options. So maintaining those options is really, really critical, which is
the funny
not
thing
something.
is,
Yes.
the funny thing is that can be the really strong person. That can be
Yes.
the power lifter who can't turn his head because he's done so much bench press. You know,
Exactly.
he's done so
Right.
many heavy deadlifts that he can't rotate when he walks. He has to walk like a tin man. So it can be the person that sits on their ass, and it can also be the person that's trained their ass off. They've just haven't worked on some of the qualities they need to have a long lasting life. Like they haven't done
Yes.
any agility work, they haven't done any balance work. They've just deadlifted heavy things and lifted heavy things. And their body has basically said, we just need to become this giant block that doesn't move. That's why I'm really careful how much really heavy movements I do. And if I do them, I make sure I do them in ways that make me move better, because I can become that giant tin man that's unoiled, that's walking along, do, 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 do. So the big thing is training is an adaptation, and you're trying to get a specific result. So you've got to be like, okay, I'm trying to get a little stronger. I'm trying to add muscle mass. What's the amount of stress I need to put on my body for that to happen? And most people either overdo it or underdo it. And so after you've built an aerobic base through different circuits, and the cool thing is if you haven't done anything, if you're pushing, you're dragging a prowler, pushing it, you're doing a carry, you're doing a bear crawl in a circuit, maybe that you're doing a med ball slam with that, and you go through that, 6 to 8 times that you're at an easy pace. If you aren't trained, you're going to gain muscle just from that, right? So there's no need to do anything fancy or any kind of fancy stuff. If you haven't trained in years, or if you're brand new, just body weight circuits and calisthenics are going to get you a long way. And
Mm.
then once we get through that and through those things like the bear crawls and the carries and the drags and the pushes, we're going to be able to get your body in a better position so that when you do lift weights, you're going to be able to get into that zone of apposition so that your shoulders, your hips, and everything can move to the best means of their ability, and that we're not putting your body into positions where your body has to compensate or cheat in order to perform the movement. And sometimes that's fine in an emergency situation, but we don't want that extended arched position to be our go-to.
Right.
If I pointed it out to you when we'd go to the gym, and I'd be like, see that? That's a compensatory strategy. That's a compensatory strategy. And the guy
Yeah.
would use a compensatory strategy on every single, he's squatting with a hard arch. He's doing curls with a hard arch. He's doing
Yeah.
pull-ups with a hard arch. He's not doing a full range of motion. He's, everything's with the shoulder blades pulled together, so that you reinforce that position over and over again, it's going to show up in your own life. And you walk around with your shoulders pinned back together like this, with your pelvis dumped forward. It's going to really affect your ability to turn. And guess what's going to happen when you're doing dishes and you go to rotate and put the dish away? You're not going to rotate well, and you're going to pop something in your back. So we have to be able to move in different ways, and the key is to mix some of the strength training, some of the bodybuilding with some warm up, with some movement, and then modifying these exercises to get people to move better, as opposed to doing a lot of the things that will buy you instant strength, like pulling your shoulder blades together really hard. But in the long run, it's going to end up with your shoulders not functioning well.
And the second reason that I think people need to stay physically active is something you talk about a lot, Jim, which is explosive power. Because if
That's
you
the
lose
first
the
thing you
movement
lose.
options, then you can't move at all. But if you lose explosive power, you can't do really important things like get up off the floor when you fall, or get out of the way of something that's coming at you that could ruin you.
Mhm.
And these are things that people don't tend to think about until they've already lost these abilities. And when
Mhm.
they've lost the abilities, then they really become dependent upon other people to push them around, help them navigate life. They become dependent upon backup cameras. And this is just that gradual lessening of your independence.
Mhm.
But what I think a lot of people miss is that those number 1 and 2 reasons for physical exercise from a health longevity perspective really feed into a third one that I think is much less understood by the general public, and even amongst health and wellness professionals is probably not. I think I think that they don't really. The way I would explain it is not the way I think most of them would explain it, which is essentially this: the more you exercise and the more physically fit you are, what you're ultimately doing is you're telling your body, hey, I need more mitochondria in my muscle to be able to produce more force and more energy. Now, the reality is when you look at, say, a bodybuilder who's just trying to look as big as possible, he may have the same amount of mitochondria and be able to produce the same amount of force from his muscles as someone who's actually less well muscled than he is. It just depends on what's the strategy. Like Jim tells really funny stories about putting people who are very, very strong into positions where they can't use their compensatory strategies that they've learned to use, and they look weak. They look and they feel kind of foolish. Is that fair, Jim?
Oh,
And
yes.
the reason why that's so important is that it's not just about muscle size, it's about mitochondrial density. Because what are those mitochondria doing? They're producing light. What does light do? Light structures intracellular water. There's a very strong correlation between loss of muscle mass and increased morbidity and mortality. That loss of muscle mass is one of the harbingers of premature aging, disability, and death. And it's not just about the falls, it's not just about the hip fractures, because what you'll see is that all cause mortality goes up, all the causes of death increase. And my belief, and I don't know if this has yet been borne out in the literature, but my belief is that the light being produced by those mitochondria structures the water within the body, even within organs that are not necessarily near the muscle. Things like and some of these, I mean, almost all of your vital organs are near muscles. The brain is not exactly near a ton of muscle, but I wonder how light is moved around the body by the blood. I think it has to be. Obviously, light structures water, and if light structures water, then light structures the blood. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is all about the fourth phase of water. Gerald Pollack, Gilbert Ling, May Wan Ho. These are rabbit holes that you can dive down if you want. But the bottom line here is that light produces energy inside the cell by structuring water. And the more mitochondria you have, the more light they're producing, the more structured the water within your cells are going to be. And I believe this is why we see this longevity benefit to muscle mass, which is really only a surrogate marker for mitochondria. And so I'm less concerned from a longevity perspective with the amount of muscle someone has as an absolute, volume, and much more concerned with how much explosive power can they manifest. Can they still use their joints? Can they still go to the gym? Can they still exercise? Can they still walk? Because only if they can continue to use these muscles will they be able to maintain or increase their mitochondrial density to improve their health. And that is
Yeah.
why, when I first talked to Jim about him joining me in working together, I saw there's a huge opportunity for synergy here that most patients don't even understand. They're too mired in the model of doctor visit, lab testing, doctor visit, supplements, medications, maybe diet and lifestyle changes. When the reality is that 2, 3, 4, 5 visits with somebody like Jim sprinkled in between the consults makes everything stick better, which is why if you go look at our testimonials at the practice, virtually everyone gives 20 to 50% of the credit for their improvement to some combination of training with Jim or another team member or the group coaching that we do that's led largely by Jim and the rest of our health coaches.
A big part of that too that people forget about is the brain. Movement is develops the brain. That's why play is so important for children. That's why we're going to have an epidemic of children with mental health issues and learning
Yeah.
problems because they don't move. And even as you age, one of the best things you can do if you have a stroke or you have a head injury is get down on the floor and go through the baby rolling patterns that helped you learn how to walk. You learned how to walk by rolling around on the floor in weird ways. That's how you learned how to walk. You rolled over, you got yourself up, you fell on your face, and you did it again. And that's how you learned how to manage this big, massive melon that we have, right? So
Mm-hmm.
movement is key to keeping your brain healthy. And that's why a lot of these people rot, is because they don't move. And if you don't put a demand on the body, it's going to say, well, you're not using these muscles. Muscles is very expensive, right? So if you're not using it, your body's going to say, well, we just need to get rid of it. Bone density is very expensive. So why am I carrying around all this extra muscle and extra bone if I don't need it? But people will go to the other extreme. If you put too much stress too soon, you're not going to recover. You'll end up getting hurt or burned out. Some
Right.
simple ways people can develop explosive power at any age. Aerodyne bike, doing a hard sprint on the Aerodyne bike for 10 seconds, as hard as you can go, the handles, and then resting for 45 seconds to a minute and doing 8 to 10 sets of that. That is a beautiful way to work on explosive power. Medicine ball slams in different ways with a step, rotational slams into the floor, rotational slams side to side, sitting on a bench and just jumping up in the air and soft landing on the way down, jumping up in the air, light shadow boxing, starting with easy skip rope. These are all ways we can develop explosive power with no matter what the age is. A lot of people, as they age, think they have to run sprints and stuff. Yes, if you're capable of doing that, short sprints are great, but you can develop explosive power by doing so many different things other than sprints. Sports like pickleball are great for that because you're moving explosively in different directions. People that play racket sports actually have a higher longevity rate than people that don't play racket sports because it's that cross connect. It's moving across the body. Oh, yes. You can look
I
up the
did not know
research
that.
on racket sports and life expectancy.
I thought that was
Very,
partly because of the social.
well, it's the social too, but it's also the demands in a three-dimensional space where you're moving in different ways. It's making the brain track a ball. You're having to use both sides of your brain. You're having to hit across yourself. So you're using your brain in different ways, and you're having to predict and track a ball. Think about all the things that have to happen when you have to track. That's why it's so important for kids to learn how to throw things. They need to play badminton. They need to play Frisbee. They need to be able to track things. They need to be able to move and track. And so that just keeps the brain fresh and healthy. And so that's why
Yeah.
bouncing on trampoline is fine. Trampolines are good.
So
it's a tool.
one thing you said
like
that I want to mention too is that when you look at psychosomatic or somatic medicine, mind body medicine, almost always the paradigms that are being used that are validated, neurofeedback, EMDR, which we talk about a lot, they have to do with, or there's some component of, like Jim was saying with the racket sports, cross connecting the body and also with movement. And Hippocrates said walking is a man's best medicine, and it often comes out in testimonials from people who've overcome some kind of horrible stress and illness, that walking really helped them process emotions. And there's a lot of components to that. You're moving through three-dimensional space, like Jim was saying. You're moving one side of your body and then the other. You're moving through an environment that's dynamic. It's changing. I really wonder how walking actually helps people process their emotions. I don't think I think it's a serious or significant effect. I would be very curious to look at research on that, although I haven't had the time, and I don't know if anyone's really done it the way I think it should be done. But I think that that's one of the reasons walking as we recommend it to patients all the time is so impactful for them. It's
Mhm.
having a real effective, because people don't realize that the literature really clearly shows that emotions get trapped in the body. And by moving the body, manipulating the body, changing the body, its shape, its structure, how it's moving, what's activating, you can really have a profound effect on someone's um, overall health, well being, longevity, their relationships, all kinds of things, which is why we don't just view the body in this gross reductionistic biomechanical paradigm that is so normal in the physical therapy, chiropractic, even many other modalities. People are looking at what Bill Hartman calls the dead guy model of anatomy. You're just a bunch of pulleys and levers and whatever, and they're all put together in this certain way. And the reality is there's way more going on in these cells and tissues, like light being released from mitochondria, and emotions being stored in tissues and organs. And these sound like woo woo, out there, weird, bizarro concepts, and people are often reticent to engage with them because of that. But there's genuine research behind them backing up the reality, and that give us then therapeutic options that help us to get people to where they'd like to be, whether they're trying to recover from a chronic or serious illness, or they're trying to just optimize their health and live as long as possible. Fitness has to be a part of that solution. So,
Well, and movement gets fluid into certain areas. And if you don't move well, and if you lose movement options, you're going to get compression in certain areas.
right,
And it tend to be the low back, they tend to be hips. Um, and you can't get fluid into those areas. And then those areas rot essentially. Um,
right,
Shannon,
and that, yeah,
I do a lot of hip mobility and functional movement than I do progressive lifting anymore. I would say, depending on where you are, how much muscle mass you are, you got to do at least 1 or 2 sessions a week where you're challenging yourself. But I'm actually going to do exercises that challenge your strength, that actually improve your hip mobility. And the key to improving your hip mobility is improving your pelvic position and your rib cage position. When your pelvis is dumped too far forward or jammed too far forward, you lose the ability to internally, externally rotate your hips. And then you start bending through your spine and rotating through your spine. So we want to make sure that pelvis is in the right position, and then your foot position. You're putting the right pressure on the right areas of the foot so that you're able to get the internal, external rotation you need from the hip. And so putting the dumbbells in the right place, or giving you the right version of a deadlift, trap bar, elevated, or whatever it is going to put your body in the best position to be the most efficient possible, and to also increase your movement options, as opposed to, or not at least take movement options away and limit that as much as possible. And a lot of times with these exercises, what we have to do is we have to do a program, test your mobility, and see how much, if I'm working with a wrestler, my mobility demands are going to be much different than if I'm working with a 75 or 80-year-old grandmother or grandfather who just wants to play with their kid on the floor and get up and down. I'm going to have a much different grading scale than a wrestler. A wrestler has to bend in weird ways, have someone sit on them, and all sorts. So my standards are going to be much different for a wrestler than an offensive lineman, than a grandmother. So everybody, just like a car, I'm going to judge a 4Runner totally different than I'm going to judge a Ferrari, or I'm going to judge a Camry. I would have different expectations for all of those different vehicles, just
right,
like a job. Like, if I have someone who's a manager or someone who's a high level executive, I'm going to have different expectations for them if I have someone as a janitor. There's nothing wrong with it being a janitor. There's nothing wrong with being an executive. Each one has different jobs and different expectations. It's the same thing with training. Every different type of training has a place, and every level of fitness has a place. And you don't have to be like, Rocky Balboa and Rocky Four to live a nice, healthy lifestyle. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of the fitness industry. You have to look like an Instagram model to be healthy. And that's the total. Like, we had another bodybuilder here die this week at 36.
wow,
Had a heart attack. So
Jim,
extreme muscle, extreme fitness is just as bad as being sedentary.
we got to
Yes.
wrap it up. I got a 10:30.
Okay. Well, you guys have yourself a great day. Go over to Stillman Wellness, get on our email list. We're going to be talking about one of Dr. Stillman's protocols this week. The only way to get on that is to get on on the email list. You get an email Wednesday night. You'll get a link to the webinar we do on Thursday. All those webinars can be found in our Optimum Wellness membership, which is, less than $1 a day. You get access to all our Thursday webinars plus Q&As with Dr. Stillman and I. If you want even more coaching and more help, and I can actually I did this last week. I ran a lady through a workout and made some really tiny adjustments and just absolutely blew her mind with a few simple things. You can get on like six calls with me in a month, and we can really dial in your exercise program. So have yourself a great day. Make sure you get outside.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us.